Hello.
Hello.
Welcome to LitFest Pasadena. This is the Authors and Airwaves panel. And I love how they gave us the title also, Literary Podcasters Talk Podcast. Thank you, Kat, and everyone that's helped us at Pasadena LitFest. So what we got here is authors and podcasters. And also we're going to discuss the mistakes we've made. And then this one scares me. They added this. How do podcasters stand above the thousands of podcasts by creating quality content? I did not know there was thousands of podcasts, and now I'm completely rattled to ever do a podcast again. On our panel, we have Meghan Daum. She's the host of Unspeakable. That's her podcast. She also has books. The Problem with Everything, My Journey Through the New Culture Wars, and The Unspeakable, and other subjects of discussion. Hey, Meghan, what is Unspeakable Podcast about?
Well, thanks for having me, Tony. And this is my first ever panel about podcasting after having done 1 million book festivals and book panels. So I'm super excited. The Unspeakable Podcast is an interview show. It's a weekly interview program. And I talk to different sorts of people. I talk to authors, I talk to scientists, scholars, artists, various kinds of interesting people. And the idea is to have long, sort of free-ranging conversations about subjects that, for any number of reasons, have been rendered unspeakable in the current moment. And in my view, often they have been rendered such because they haven't been talked about with the proper nuance or complexity. So I make a very big point of finding the right person to talk about the right subject. And so I've had people on talking about, gender identity issues. I've had a lot of people talking about sort of, the conflict between culture and politics. Had some people on talking about the coronavirus lab leak hypothesis back in February when not as many people were talking about it. So that's the basic idea.
I love it, Meghan. Thank you so much. And now Zibby Owens is the host of Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books podcast. And she's also author of Moms Don't Have Time to, a quarantine anthology, and Moms Don't Have Time to Have Kids, a timeless anthology. Zibby, what's the podcast Moms Don't Have Time to Read? What's that podcast about?
So I actually have, well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's so nice to be with you.
Did I blow your intro? I blew your intro.
I know. I'm just going to take it over from here.
Okay.
You're fired, Tony. That's it. Thank you, everybody, for having me. It's lovely to be here with you, Tony and Meghan. No, I'm kidding. I have 3 podcasts. My big podcast that I've been doing for 3 years is called Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. And I've been doing it actually 7 days a week for a while. Now I'm really trying hard to scale it back to 5, but I'm having trouble because I have trouble saying no to authors. My whole mission is kind of to lift up authors and highlight under celebrated parts of books. And I love doing that. And I love talking to authors and reading. And so that's what my whole podcast is about. We do about 30 minutes because I don't know about you, and I'd be interested to hear, but I found people kind of stop listening by 30 minutes. So I try to cut them short to that and ask the questions that I just really want to know. They don't have to be standard questions, but I'm not afraid to ask someone about their hair color. Or, I don't know. I mean, from the intellectual to the mundane. And then I have another podcast I started called Moms Don't Have Time to Lose Weight, which is a weekly show that I started it back in September when it seemed like everybody was, including myself, had gained all this weight from the pandemic. And I was like, does anyone want to try to lose weight with me? So I started it then, although that's sort of, fizzled in terms of my own efforts, but I'm still limping along with the podcast. And then I recently started this really funny podcast called Moms Don't Have Time to Have Sex, which I do with this international sex expert, Tracy Cox, who has written 17 books, and it's like a Dear Abby, and I read out loud the questions and she does all the answering. But it's very funny because she's British and hilarious, and I'm very shy about all these things. So it's entertaining. That's also once a week. So those are my shows.
That's great. Oh my God, it's 7 days a week. We're gonna have to talk about that because I like to say no to authors. Well, you gotta weed them out as far as I'm concerned. So I host the podcast Drinks with Tony, and as we were talking earlier, I started it about 20 years ago on a mistake. I had a webzine at the time, and a publicist said, "Hey, do you want to interview Chuck Palahniuk?" And I was like, "Yeah." And she goes, "What's it for?" And I'm like, "The literary web stream." And they're like, "Well, that sounds amazing," because no one knew what that was at the time. And since then, I just kept going on Drinks with Tony. But I used to do it more on radio, and then I switched it to full podcast a couple years ago. And then my book is called Confessions of a Teenage Jesus Jerk, and it's now a major motion picture. Well, it's a medium motion picture. It's on Amazon, and Eric Stoltz directed it. So if you want to check that out, that's the lay of the land. Can we go back to Zibby? You want to for me, I get too many people requesting, and I have to go through and kind of see, okay, is this person going to be a jerk or are they going to be nice? That's how I book. I don't know. How do you book?
My first criterion is I have to really want to read the book, because I spend a lot of time and read not every single page, but I read at least big portions of every book that I cover. And it has to be something I'm interested in, or that piques. Yeah, I have to be interested in the book. And then I also try to include a mix of all sorts to make it a diverse podcast, right? A mix of voices, genders, religions, politics, races, everything. So I combine those two things, and I do say no. I say no to tons of people, I have to say. It's just a lot of books look really good. So I don't
do you feel bad.
I don't
feel bad for saying no?
It's not that I feel bad, although I do feel bad, but it's more that I don't want to miss the opportunity to get to know someone who might be super interesting and have like a great conversation with, because after my podcast, I sort of maintain a whole community. I have live events. I'm doing a retreat in November. I used to have salon events in my house all the time. I have book fairs. I have like a Facebook group for my guests. So I just like to introduce everybody. And I don't know, when I say no, I mean, I have to do it more, but I don't know. I don't do it as much whether I think they're nice, because I feel like that's hard to tell. But even if I don't know. I do it more based on the book.
I like that. Megan, how do you book your guests? And, it seems like you also hit topics where you might be able to offend your guests. There's like a risk there, right? Or is there?
Maybe more offend the audience. I only launched my podcast last August, so I'm the baby here. So I'm still kind of finding my way. I think about what I want to talk about, and then I think about who might be the best person to talk about that thing. And so that's one way I find guests, and I have to go seek them out. I do my podcast, like I think both of you, totally by myself. I don't have a producer. I don't have a booker. I don't have anybody doing that. So I do a lot of like reaching out to people, explaining to them what the show is. So that's one way. I do have people pitching me, but it's hard because it is a show. It's a conversation-based show about ideas. And so even if somebody has a fantastic book, there's not always a way to kind of frame the conversation so it's not just about the book. I do have novelists, but I usually try to kind of guide the conversation so it's not like an author interview. You don't want to do too many of those. Yeah.
Thank you. I got to tell you, with Drinks with Tony, I try to get off the book as fast as possible. I want to find out what the relationships are like, because I want to learn how to have a good relationship. I want to
never have good relationships. Yeah, that's bad advice.
So starting it in August, how did you go? Okay, I'm going to just start a podcast. That's got to be a daunting decision.
Yeah, I had wanted to do one for a really long time. I was a big sort of fan of this kind of like heterodox thinker space, people like Sam Harris, people like Glenn Lowry and John McWhorter. Just there is this kind of universe of thinkers kind of talking about issues on an issue by issue basis, trying to resist like tribalism and all this stuff sort of across the political spectrum. So I was a real fan of that world, and I'd written a lot of stuff sort of in that space. But I'd always wanted to do a podcast. And yeah, the pandemic, I feel like it's the biggest cliche in the world. During the pandemic, people either got a puppy or they started a podcast. I did both. And the puppy, ended up making various cameo barking appearances in the podcast. But yeah, I asked a lot of people for advice, tons and tons of advice, maybe even too much advice. There were various kind of existing platforms that wanted me to join with them, and I seriously considered it. But then in the end, I just felt like it was better to do it myself. So I finally just found a production person who does, the actual, I do everything else, and I give him the editing notes and the timestamps and all that. I cannot do audio editing. That's my big obstacle. But I found that person and got a website going and got it launched. It was a huge effort, but there was nowhere to go. So there you go.
I like that because I've done audio editing since we were splicing reel-to-reel tapes. So the audio editing is the favorite part of my whole thing. But that you bring up a good point, because a lot of people don't have that experience. So diving in and just finding somewhat. How did you find this person to help you with that?
It was somebody whose podcast I was a guest on. I mean, I've been a guest on a million podcasts, so I had all those resources, all the hosts of the podcasts that I'd been a guest on. I was able to ask them for advice. So yeah, it was a production person. They're actually not in the US. They're in Colombia, in South America. They have it's called Talking Silkworm. They do a fantastic job. So I was referred to them through her, and yeah, it's worked out great.
Now, is it cheaper to get labor from Colombia than from here?
It is less expensive than what I've heard, but they're extremely professional, and they're not. It's not nothing. I do pay them.
No, exactly.
I know.
I was trying to be stupid and cheeky, and I'm not good at it.
There were other, I don't know, but they work with clients all over the world.
Yeah, that's cool. Zibby, how did you go? Oh, so you got like 30 podcasts going. I don't know how you do 7 days a week. So bring me through you're like, you know what? The very beginning, you're like, I'm starting a podcast, and episode 1. Well, did you know you were going to do daily, or were you like, how did that happen?
No, it's all grown. And by the way, my sound editors are actually in Canada, and I'd never really thought about that before. But yeah, I have
taking jobs out of America.
I know. Now I feel bad.
No, we're here to. I'm being silly. Yeah. These are bad jokes. Keep going.
I approached this sort of the opposite way as Meghan did. I did almost no research, just a little bit at the very last minute. I hadn't wanted to start a podcast for a long time. I hadn't even really known anything about podcasts, but I wanted to be a writer. I've always loved to read. I've always loved to write. And I had all these different ideas. And one day my husband said, you should take all these essays you've been writing and turn them into a book. And I said, moms don't have time to read books. And then I thought, that's so funny. I'll just make that the title of my book. And the people in the publishing industry who I talked to about it did not think they would find that funny. And then at the same time, a girlfriend of mine said, you should really just start a podcast. At the time, I wasn't on Instagram. I had no social media. I was like, I had been publishing in magazines since I was 14, but of course that means nothing in today's world. So she said, start a podcast. So I literally just Googled how to start a podcast. And I snuck into my bedroom and found the easiest podcast app ever or whatever. And I recorded my first one by myself, just reading one of my essays. Because I found out originally I wanted to read essays to save people time, right? Like all the things I would be pulling out of the newspaper or ripping out of magazines, but that was illegal. So I thought, okay, well, I guess I'll just try interviewing authors directly about what they wrote, including journalists and whatever. And I did my first one with a dear friend of mine who I went to business school with, Lee Carpenter, who's written 2 novels. And I loved it. I just loved it. We sat at my desk. I just asked her all these questions about her, about the book, the behind the scenes, advice to aspiring authors. And I was like, this is so much fun. So I did it once a week for a long time. And that felt like a lot, by the way. I was like, how can I get this done? Now that I'm doing it so much, I'm like, what did I know? Yeah. But I started once a week and then eventually went to twice a week. And then during the pandemic, I really stepped it up because I was trying to help as many authors as I could. So I started this Instagram live show. It didn't matter if I liked the book or not. I didn't even have to open it. I was just like, anyone who wants to talk about their new book that's coming out, just like come on my show. And every day at 11, I'll do an hour and you can come on and talk and, I'll do my part. And then I ratcheted it up to 5 a week. And then I went to 7 a week. I did all these blasts, like, I don't know, different genre, like fiction week and nonfiction week. And I was just like doing as much as I could. And that's how it ratcheted up. It wasn't the plan. I should say I did do some research in that I listened to competitive podcasts a little bit just to see like what people even did. And I was like, oh, sounds like people all have sponsors. I better get a sponsor or two at the beginning. So I did the bare bones of research, but really I just did the podcast the way I wanted to do it. And I was like, if nobody listens, nobody listens, but like, I'm going to have fun and start a podcast. And that's sort of been my guiding attitude. It's like, I hope people like it, but if not, I love it. So.
Yeah, I approached it that way as well. So when I started this, I was interviewing these big time famous authors and I didn't have any books out or I hadn't even started writing a book. So my early podcasts my early shows were, so how do you start writing? So it was all self-serving almost. And it would, and then after I had written a book, I was like, so how do you get an agent? And they would tell me the process of it. Okay. And then I just publish it. But there's at the same time, there's what do you call it? It's just so much fun. And now I have my friends on Drinks with Tony and I have a very different conversation when there's a microphone in front of us. We almost learn more about each other when we're on the spot than when we're just hanging out for 4 hours somewhere. We learned something different. I think there's a different angle when there's a pressure of a microphone, kind of like the pressure of a podcast where we're learning so much about each other right now,
No, it's so funny you say that because I spend all this time doing my podcast and I barely have time to see my girlfriends anymore between my podcast and I have 4 children. So that's like my life and my husband. Yeah, sorry. But so I don't have time to see my friends. So I literally recently was like, I should just schedule an interview with some of my girlfriends because then I would like have that uninterrupted time. And anyway, so maybe I'll go back to that.
Yeah, it's fun. And it also gives me time. Some people I'm acquaintances with and I love, and I'm like, I want to hang out with you for an hour and we'll have a microphone. And they're like, okay, I guess we got to show up.
Yeah, hard to cancel.
Exactly. So Meghan, how are you feeling now? Because how many months are we into your podcast? About 9 months?
Yeah. So I think I'm on my 35th episode. So yeah.
What do you feel like you've learned from episode 1 to episode 35?
Gosh, it has really taken over my life. It's an incredible amount of work. I can't believe you do so many, Zibby. I'm like, my head is spinning. It's a lot of preparation. I guess I honestly have to say my biggest frustration, and I am learning slowly. So this does answer your question, but I still have not got there. It has to do with like just sound quality. Sorry to be so banal here for a moment. Maybe you're going to get to this, but just controlling the sound quality on the guest end is incredibly frustrating because I can control how I sound. But at the end of the day, there's like, is their mic setting right? Is there, I tell them to wear headphones. Like we have a number of things and you can't like physically go into their house and like sit them in the chair and speak into this and sit this far away from it and make sure your settings are right. So that gives me incredible anxiety every time. And whenever I'm recording, there's part of me that's like so terrified that it's actually either not recording or sounds terrible. And it's not until like I can download the thing and make sure that I can relax. So I need to kind of get over that learning curve.
You bring up a good point because until pandemic, I never did an interview there was no distance interviews. It was always in person. Right. And since I live in Los Angeles, authors coming through, I was scheduled with them for an hour as they were bouncing from station to station or whatever they needed to do. And then we're stuck in pandemic and we're stuck with the quality of what we have here. And I I love it because I get to interview authors that I never would be able to interview because they live in North Carolina and don't tour or whatever. But it's also the sound part. Just it hurts. Zibby, how have you been doing it?
I do it. I honestly, I don't really care that much. I mean, now I feel like I was listening to you talk about this, and I was like, maybe I should be worrying about this.
I come from a sound engineer family, though, so I'm extreme. So don't listen to. Don't.
I mean, I just don't worry about that. I mean, I don't know. I never claimed to have it be highly produced. Like my show is not one with like, scripts and anything. It's just a conversation. It's just like someone can listen in. So I don't even edit it unless somebody says, take out my kid's name or I don't know, something. Otherwise I just, I mean, I have sound editors who make it sound better and put my intro, outro, sponsor, blah, blah, blah. But so it is what it is. And this is the best I can do. And I don't know. I can't worry about that. I worry about so many things, but that is not one I worry about.
Don't bring that on yourself. You're doing great. You know what? It's funny. So I don't edit I say we're recording live. I don't edit. And there is no editing because as far as I'm concerned, I come from radio where we can't take anything back. It's on the air. And I love that. I love the urgency. But I've had some problems where people ask me later to edit something out. And I'm like, I told you at the beginning, no. And there's a couple really crappy guests that I've had that have asked me to pull the whole show. And I'm like, you're asking me to edit something so stupid. It blows my mind. I now have authors I hate that have been on my show because they'll ask me to pull a whole episode because I'm like, I'm not going to edit it. I don't edit my idiotic responses and everything that, that I say that's stupid, which is usually me. So anyway, have you ever run into that where you have a guest that was not happy with the show or the episodes?
There was one person who had so much she wanted to take out that I said, you know what, I think it's probably better if we just don't air this. So that's like the only one actually that's only happened one time. And now I have like over 700 episodes or something crazy. A couple of times people have said too much about a family member that they wanted to protect. That's really the main time people ask me to go back in and change it. And I feel like I understand that. Like, that's not a big deal. Like I get privacy, so I'll do that. But if somebody recently said, can I just listen and make sure I like it before you air it? And I was like, sorry, no, you can't. Like I'm sorry, but no. Like, can you imagine like in that and then she's going to obviously have changes. Like,
no, Meghan, we both come from journalism backgrounds. How offensive is it that anyone would even ask that? You don't get to see it until it's in print.
Well, it's like running quotes past your source. You're never supposed to do that. Although I think more and more, I actually was interviewed for something recently, and it was for kind of a major publication. I can't remember exactly. And they actually they sent the quotes back to me. They ran the quotes, by me. And I was like, you really don't have to do that. And she was like, oh yeah, no, I will. And I think it was like the digital side of some like formerly big, like, Time or Newsweek or something like I was just shocked. So it may be that people's expectations are changing in that regard. But yeah, I've never had, a few times I've had guests say, can you just, take out this one little moment where I talked about a family member? Exactly. That's usually what it is. Sometimes, people say something and then they realize it was factually wrong or they got something wrong. So I try to maybe like finesse that a little bit. But mostly I edit just for sort of pacing. And sometimes I talk to people for, 2 hours. I mean, I once had a guest go on for over 3 hours. What? And I had to really, really edit him down. But obviously I don't change any. The gist of the conversation is the same. It's just a sort of pacing issue.
But see, that's how it doesn't make sense that I do so many, because I could have done 6 podcasts in the time you did that one.
Yeah, well, so you're more efficient.
Not to say it's just a different type of show. Like, then obviously yours can't be a speedy. It's like a weekly. It's like 60 minutes versus like some, I don't know.
Yeah, mine 120 something minutes. Yeah,
exactly. It's 120 minutes.
Yeah,
that's it. I completely lost my thought. Well, thanks. Have a good night, everybody.
Tony, how long are your shows usually?
It's funny. So I like, some people will always ask, is it going to be an hour or whatever? And I just say, expect an hour. And I don't look at the time. And usually we come to a natural end right around 55 minutes. It's almost strange. And this is a smash cut here. Like, I've learned that soft boiled eggs, I used to time them. Now I don't do it anymore. I just put them on and forget about it. And for some reason, I got a sixth sense that knows the weight of the egg bouncing in the thing, and I go get it, and it's perfect every time. So I'm starting to realize, back to podcasting, what the recipes will be after this show here. But as far as having conversations, I feel like we find our natural rhythm, and then it all kind of it finds its own way back to it. And I don't know how or why, but that's how I do it. Megan, you kind of go long form where you're like, we have to go as long as we have to get to the point. Is that?
No. So I asked them to block out an hour and a half, just because often there's sound issues in the beginning. So we get on the call, and then often we spend 10 minutes trying to figure out the audio. So the kind of space I'm in, the type of podcast that I do, it's of this genre of podcasts that tend to be very long conversations. So, Joe Rogan, who's really nothing like my show at all. Obviously, I couldn't be more different than him. He's kind of like the godfather of this type of show, and he goes on for hours and hours and hours, and people can't get enough. I mean, it's funny, people who are not familiar with this world, this type of show, sometimes say well, gosh, you could really trim that down a lot. That's really long. Are you sure people want to hear that? And I said, actually, they do. I get complaints if the show is less than an hour. They really feel cheated. I have never had anybody tell me show's too long, other than people who just don't listen to that kind of show. So yeah, you'd be surprised. But usually it's funny. I think that the sweet spot is usually between an hour and 10 and an hour and 20. That's usually pretty good. And some people really do only have an hour. They have a hard hour. And then I do try to, unlike you, I have to look at the clock. I'm looking at it, I'm trying to so the conversation is kind of like a plane. It takes off, and then and you kind of have a controlled descent and try to, hit right when they have to go. So
try the boiled eggs thing and then see what happens with your conversations. I think.
Okay. But then I'll be worried I'm going to burn the house down.
I think drinks with Tony still sounds better than eggs with Tony. So I would keep it, Yeah. I would keep the way. I think you have a good thing going there.
Watching water boil eggs with Tony. You said something there that was so cool, but I'm getting older and I'm losing my my words and my mind here. I
feel like after you do something so many times, you'll stop looking at the clock. It's just the practice of it and the rhythm of it, and then you'll know. You'll kind of know. Maybe not with eggs, but I always have a general sense. Kind of like kids. I know when bedtime is coming. I know when this is, must be time for bath. Oh, must be this, I don't know. You just kind of internalize.
It's very, very new for me. So I know, I feel like I have a million questions for you guys.
Well, throw us a question, because that would help. Because we may not even know what we're doing.
That would help Tony think of questions. So
exactly, do my job.
How much preparation do you do? The other thing is I am still of a mind where I'm not going to say I over prepare, but I really don't want to be underprepared. So I read the book. I have I usually have a handful of questions that I can refer to, but then I always try to, I've done a ton of stage interviews, over the decades. So, it's important. And also just interviewing people and reporting. So you've got to listen. Listening is the key more than anything. So you can actually ask a question based on what they just said, rather than, we've all heard those interviewers that the person speaks and then the host is okay. Oh. And then they ask the next questions. You don't want to do that. But I guess I'd be curious, how much time would you say you spend preparing for each guest?
What do you say, Zibby? Sorry.
Well, I spend at least I would say 1 to 2 hours on every book. Actually, that's a lie. I guess
reading the book. Wait, you must be a very fast reader.
I don't always finish the books, but I try to read at least the first 80 to 100 pages of every book. And if I'm loving it, I'll finish it. Or if I happen to have time that weekend or whatever, I try to do most of my reading on the weekends when I can. And then I always go to the website, go to Instagram, read a few back articles. In the beginning, though, I was I felt like I was showing up at school and I was about to be, I would get an F if I wasn't 100% prepared. So I would read every word of every book. I would do as much research as possible. I would send 12 typed out questions and the bio that I wrote myself of the guest, and I would send it all for approval before I did the show. So that's how I started. Yeah. I did that for I don't know, 2 years, the first year and a half or so, until finally an author was like, hey, why do you send the questions? Maybe you'd have and I didn't always follow the questions. I would let the conversation go where it went, but I wanted to know what I had in mind so they could be prepared and not surprised. Now I don't do that. In fact, I had my first live interview, not live, but with a person next to me. I used to do a lot of them in person. And she was like, you don't have any notes, or you didn't write down your questions? And I was like, well, no, because at this point I've done it 700 times and I know how to ask and how to have conversations. And, but at first I was like you, and I think it helped my own anxiety and gave me peace of mind. But now, I usually read at least an hour or two of everybody's book, and I do read really, really quickly, and everything has sped up as I've done it. I couldn't do this at the beginning, but now I can kind of speed read the second half of the book, and I get everything out of I really do. I get all the stuff that happens. So I guess there are some I don't spend as long on if they're an advice, some nonfiction books I don't read, I can read the headings versus all the text, but I try because the conversations are much better when I have something to talk about or a point of view or whatever. So I guess that's I would say roughly 2 hours an episode, but maybe not, some are much more and some are much less.
I'm glad you talked about that, because at the beginning because I used to bring my recorder to hotel rooms and interview Wim Wenders and Gus Van Sant and all these people. I'm just all I wanted to do was make sure that they were interested enough and didn't kick me out after 20 minutes. So I would have about 2 hours of conversation that I would never get to, but it was always just in case they were okay, I'm done. And I was just I'm standing before a god. and so that used to spin me around a lot. But now I'll do kind of what Zibby does. So the publishers will send out the book maybe 3 or 4 months before we're going to tape. The minute I get to the book, I'll read the first 60, 70 pages. And then I toss the book and try to forget about it. And I won't do any more prep until I just read their bio. And my only question I have for Drinks with Tony is, how are you? That's the only question I have. And we go from that. And sometimes it doesn't work out and sometimes it does. I'm learning to not be so nervous about it not working out and just going, well, that was a crap episode, and air the crap ones too. And people are and then the ones I think are crap, people are that was so amazing because blank, blank, blank. And I'm oh, okay.
Isn't that amazing? It's always the ones that you're cringing that, about once a month, I'm oh, this one is really bad. This is the one that's going to do me in. And then it never materializes,
I actually reached out to someone after I did one on a day when I hadn't prepared enough, honestly. And it was fine, but I just felt I hadn't done my best. I hadn't put my best foot forward. So I emailed the publicist and I was I don't feel like I did a very good job. Does she want to redo this with me? I'm willing to redo it. And they were kind of oh, that's so nice. And she really appreciates it. If you want to, she will, but you don't have to. And I was okay, then fine, let's just leave it. What am I doing? I don't want to go back and prepare. But I did feel bad. And then I've kind of have done other things with that author to kind of make it up to her, in other words. But if it's that bad, generally it's whatever. It's not going to be that bad. It's always there's something interesting about everybody. And I really love trying to figure out what that is and pulling it out of people. And I sort of the ticking clock that okay, well, let's get right to it then. Right. So
I love surprises like that, because I've had sometimes, because I usually, almost all my guests are approached by a publicist. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I'm that's, this one's not going to be that interesting. Those are the ones that usually blow my mind, because I go with these expectations that I'm not going to care. And then all I want to do is talk to them for another hour. And they're like, no, I'm done with you, Tony. And I'm like, but can't we be friends? Where do you live? And it's just like, the boundaries are being crossed here, Tony. But
I've become good friends with a lot of people I met by doing a podcast with them. Like, some of them have become like some of my really close friends, like especially people whose books I read, where I'm like, wow, I would probably be really good friends with that person. Then I interview them. Turns out I am really good friends with that person. Like, we become really good friends. So that's like I love that. They probably would be friends with you, Tony.
Well, I was being a little facetious. There's an immediate intimacy, I think, that happens in podcasting, where even when I've had acquaintances on that I've known and we're doing it in person, and then as we're leaving, there's kind of this weird, do we cuddle for a second or what do we do? And it's just like, just turn around and walk away. Because there's an intimacy, though, where I don't know if you find this in your podcasting, but I feel we're brought together in almost like a tincture of learning about each other. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden it just has to stop. Then that's the beautiful part of it too. I don't know if you get that, Meghan. Do you?
Yeah, I think so much of the intimacy to me is because it's voice only, it's audio only. Like I was like you, I was such a radio fan for forever, and I just love that medium. So I'm actually curious, do either of you do video conversations ever? And if so, do you find that distracting or helpful?
I do video. I will not interview anyone unless I have their face.
Oh, really?
But I only release the audio. But I need to see their face and I can't do it over. I used to do a lot of interviews over the phone when I was writing for the Chronicle and stuff. And it's just, it loses a little something for me, because there's I feel the person being interviewed is like, I got to get back to that point on my book, blank, blank, blank. And I'm trying to get off of that and go, can we just have a conversation and look at each other?
Yeah, I think that the visual is so important. Like, as I said, I used to do it in person as much as possible. And now unless they're like a really big deal, I'm like, okay, fine, Alicia Keys, you don't have to do video with me. That's okay. But like I would say 99% of people, we do video, and it makes such a difference. I don't know if they don't feel comfortable. I'm like, I don't have to put it on YouTube. It's fine. But I would love to look you in the eye and have a conversation. Yeah,
they like to know that I'm not going to release the video. And then then they're just like, okay, cool. And then we can just talk. And as long as they know I'm not going to release it. Alicia Keys, you talked to her and she didn't want to do video? Mm-mm. I used to like her.
Yeah.
Until now.
There's someone else coming up who said no video, but I'm about to interview Cindy McCain. John McCain's.
Oh my gosh.
And she said no video.
She has a book out?
She has a book out called Stronger, which is really interesting, actually. Did you know she had an opioid addiction?
Yes, I heard that.
Okay, I did not know that.
Yeah,
I didn't really know that much about her. So
that's interesting. So she's being open about it. Good for her. That's great.
I had Jill Biden on before she was the first lady. That was really cool.
So do you approach them, or are they pitching you? How are you getting these big names? Both of you, like Gus Van Sant and Wim Wenders and Cindy McCain. What's your secret to booking these folks?
I mean, for me, it's built up over time. I've done this now for, every week, at least once now, many times. And it's just grown word of mouth, and I just get pitched all the time, and it's great. But it's taken a while. Like, I'm interviewing Lauren Weisberger, who wrote The Devil Wears Prada, and she has a new book out. And the publicist pitched me, and I literally forwarded her this thing. It was a different publicist, but I had tried to book her 3 years ago. She was one of my first ones I wanted to get. And they were like, so sorry, there's no time in her calendar. And I was like, full circle moment here for me, Sarah. I tried to get Lauren 3 years ago. And now it's gotten to a point where Lauren, we DM, and she's like, I can't believe I haven't met you yet. I'm like, I know, blah, blah, blah. So I don't know. It's just changed. It's just changed, and it's taken a lot of work and a lot of time. So it's not like it just happened. But it was a slow, gradual progression. And every week Like seems to, I'm always like, ooh, what do I have in these emails? Like what what book is this? Or it's a book I loved like years ago. And now the author has something new out and I'm like, oh my gosh, like Anita Diamond. I love The Red Tent. That was such a good book. Like, oh my gosh, how cool that I get to talk to her. I don't know. It's just exciting.
Yeah.
It's a dream gig. It blows my mind. I also teach, and I always tell my, especially my novel students, I'm like, do you like an author? Write them a letter. And they're like, I'm like, you write anybody a letter. I don't care if they're on the bestseller list. They freak out when they get replies. I'm like, you have no idea.
Yeah.
We're aching for validation.
I know.
Thank you.
I know.
Early days, I used to run this thing called Film Junkie. And we used to have like video. This is like we had video stuff in the days of early internet where the video was this small, and so that's how I got a lot of the film stuff. I was running this film festival and doing that, and then everything kind of veered towards books only for Drinks with Tony. So, which on this portion of it. So when I started a little over 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago, the podcast only portion of it, it's only been authors who. Except for a couple exceptions, screenwriters. So, but with what I did before, the publicist remember Drinks with Tony from years ago, and that's why I had to keep the name. I was going to change it because I used to go to bars and be boozing with these people and tape it, and then now I'm like, the stupidest thing to do is have a drink when you're trying to have a conversation. I want to be in utter awkwardness, stone cold sober, drinking espresso and having my nerves rattled. That's a better conversation.
Good
yeah.
point.
I do not drink in podcast.
No, nor have I.
Yeah. But do you drink it? Do you drink and, no, I'm kidding. That's the other conversation.
I don't even drink coffee because then I would have to run to the bathroom in the middle.
This
is an issue. That's another reason to edit. I'm sorry to be so crude, but it's true.
Break. You bring up a great point. When I do this, people will have to, I'll have a delivery come in the middle of a podcast.
Of course.
But I'll keep it all in. I'll just be like, hey, look, I'm keeping everything in, but I'll just cut the silent part down to so I'll just be like, oh crap, here's a delivery. God damn it. And then it cuts back. And now we're back from the delivery. Yeah. So I just keep the mistakes in, is what I say.
Yeah. People do like that. But the dog barking, construction outside, there's always something.
Meghan, are you going to start to do it in person now that we're kind of opening up? Do you think that's an option?
I'd like to, just because it's going to sound a lot better. But honestly, my guests are just all over the place. I don't know. I mean, even though I'm in New York City, I think it would be limiting. So we shall see. I mean, I will certainly try, but I like being able to. I've interviewed people in Australia and Europe. I mean, it's nice to just have the option. I'm trying to even think what percentage of people I have interviewed that are in the same city. Not a huge amount, actually. So I don't know, but certainly some. I would definitely like to do some more in person. Yeah.
I guess we should talk about gear for a minute because I think people really care about what we use. And it looks like, do you have a Yeti mic? Is that what that is, Zibby?
I do.
I called it.
Blue Yeti.
Cool.
Yep.
And it's essentially when you record, are you recording on Zoom when you talk to these people? How are you recording? What are you recording on?
I used to use GarageBand and now I use Zoom. Cool. If they're in person, I'll do GarageBand, and I have 2 microphones.
And that goes directly to your computer?
It goes directly to my computer, and then I use WeTransfer, and I send the MP3 files to my sound guys.
Okay, cool.
How about you guys?
I use Zencaster, and I actually do not like seeing the person. So I'm the odd man out here. I really find it I can concentrate a lot better if I'm just listening. I am embarrassed because I do not know the manufacturer of so I have an interface, a device where the mic plugs into the headphones, and it just kind of helps the helps the sound. what is the name? Yeah, I don't know. So yeah, but I use Zencaster, and then I send through WeTransfer, recording on 2 separate tracks. And actually, yeah, do you do 2 separate tracks? Because that way, if somebody's coughing or something underneath, or I'm saying something stupid, interrupting the person, which bad habit, then I can say, like, just get rid of me being like, while they're talking.
I use separate tracks.
Yes.
But not on Zoom. Or can we do separate tracks on Zoom?
I don't know. I just send them all of the audio and all of the video.
I have the right. So
it's like 6 files that I don't know, the chat. I just send the whole thing. But yeah, definitely in GarageBand I do two tracks.
Yeah.
I've got all messed up with Zoom, so I do. But when I'm in person, I have one boom microphone and my recording gear, and so I do this.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I have found that it's interesting because it kind of throws the baton back and forth, and at the same time, if the other person has something to say, you kind of hear them on the other side of the mic. So it's almost like we have one point of view on the audio side of things, and it's I don't know, it excites me and it scares other people. They're like, what are you putting that big boom mic in my face for? And I'm like, I know, let's just we'll talk about it. And after 10 minutes they don't even know it's there because it's just back and forth. So.
I tried that. I tried like having it come overhead. I did not like that. I don't know why. It intimidated me.
Yeah. I think it does intimidate some people who don't have mic experience, but about 10 minutes in, then they're usually like, they even forget it's there because we're looking eye to eye if we're in person. All right. So as we come to the end, final big time advice for people who want to start podcasts and promote authors and books. Not to put you on the spot with a heavy question for the end.
I think just don't overthink it. Like, make sure you have some sort of unique point of view in some way, that you're adding something to the mix. But just try it. I feel like there's no shame. I've started podcasts and stopped them. Like, who cares? Okay, so it's a limited series,
I love that.
Yeah, a couple limited series is under my belt. So I would just say, go for it. Anything to help authors and elevate books and keep the conversation going, I think is great. So I would say just jump in and try it.
Great, thanks.
Gosh, don't ask me. I'm the novice here. I guess I would say, you know what? I can actually maybe answer this better as an author who has been interviewed a million times. I have always appreciated it when people ask me questions that I haven't been asked before. Like, it's not, I'm not, obviously it's great if they've read the whole book, but you don't expect people to. But, I think that it might help. Sometimes I kind of dip into other interviews that author has given if I'm interviewing someone, and I think like, okay, well, what are they not being asked? This other thing that I could ask them that they haven't addressed this before. So especially if it's somebody who's done a million interviews, you want to be able to say to your listener, like, hey, we went here in this conversation and they haven't gone there before. And so this is what's new about this. So I've appreciated that as on both sides of the interview, I have to say.
I like that too, because I can always tell when an author's starting to talk about when they start to chat and they've said it like 100 times on tour, and I'm like, I'm thinking in my head like, let's get off that subject as fast as possible and get to something real. All right, so Zibby says just do it. Meghan says ask questions that aren't that they haven't
that are new that they haven't
right.
Yeah.
And I think my word of advice is go ahead and just embarrass yourself, because we all feel embarrassed. But the most important part is actually just doing it. And you don't even have to get the big time people. Start with your friends. Make all the mistakes. Ruin your reputation. Cancel yourself. Thank you, Meghan. Thank you, Zibby. It's been fantastic.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Meghan. That was fun.
And thank you, LitFest. Yes.